Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are tackling the human body's ultimate chemistry balancers, the kidneys. A healthy kidney flawlessly filters, balances, and regulates this incredibly dizzying array of electrolytes, hormones, and toxins. But what happens when that magnificent system actually starts to fail? Well, our goal today is to build a clinical toolkit for chronic kidney disease, or CKD. We're going to explore exactly how medical science steps in to manually orchestrate a patient's survival when the body's natural filtration system goes offline.
Let's just dive right into it. The trajectory of CKD demands completely different levels of intervention as things progress. Just notice the flow here. We start with primary prevention, targeting risk factors like obesity and hypertension, and move down through secondary prevention aimed at slowing the decline of the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. But as we hit tertiary prevention, the harsh reality sets in. We have to manually manage uremia, fluid overload, and some seriously complex comorbidities. In a very real sense, we have to become the kidneys.
So, here is our agenda for today. We're going to quickly unpack the 5 pillars of restoring systemic balance: comprehensive dietary management, altered glucose in CKD, dyslipidaemia and CV risk, managing dangerous hyperkalaemia, and finally, the hyperphosphataemia domino effect.
All right, starting with pillar number 1, comprehensive dietary management, which is really about fueling this whole balancing act.
The real kicker here is that we aren't just putting patients on a diet, we are literally balancing their electrolytes manually through food. To avoid starvation ketoacidosis, guidelines say patients need a solid energy intake of 20 to 30 kilocalories per kilogram per day. But at the exact same time, we've got to tightly control what actually goes in. We restrict dietary sodium to less than 100 millimoles a day to manage volume expansion and hypertension. We cut out high potassium foods, and we severely restrict phosphate-rich stuff like milk, cheese, and eggs. And you know what's interesting? Generalized water restriction is actually only indicated if the patient develops hyponatremia.
Now, check out this table. There's this absolutely fascinating contrast in protein needs depending on where the patient is in their disease. In non-dialysis CKD, we heavily restrict protein, down to about 0.60 to 0.75 grams per kilogram per day, which is roughly 40 grams. Why? Because it cuts down the buildup of uremic toxins and can literally slow the rate of renal decline. But look what happens the second a patient starts dialysis. We completely flip the script. Dialysis patients require 1.0 to 1.5 grams per kilogram, and hypercatabolic patients on continuous therapies might need up to 1.7 grams a day just to compensate for dialysis losses and prevent a negative nitrogen balance. It's a very precise, constantly moving target.
Moving on to pillar 2. Altered glucose in CKD. This is what we call the insulin paradigm shift.
This brings up, honestly, one of the most counterintuitive facts in nephrology. As renal failure worsens, diabetic patients actually need less insulin, not more. See, in a healthy body, the kidneys naturally catabolize and excrete insulin. But when the kidneys fail, that clearance just stops. So while early CKD might cause insulin resistance because of all the uremic toxins, as the disease gets worse, that injected insulin just lingers in the bloodstream. Because of that, we have to actively dial back a diabetic patient's insulin dose as their kidney function declines. Otherwise, we risk throwing them into dangerous hypoglycemia.
So how do we manage this altered state? Well, contemporary guidelines target an HbA1c of 7.0 to 7.5. But the medication side of things becomes a total minefield. Standard, everyday drugs like metformin and sulfonylureas need urgent dose reductions, or even complete avoidance the second that GFR drops below 50%. But there is a massive silver lining here. SGLT2 inhibitors, also known as gliflozins. These drugs are turning out to be incredibly protective. They don't just lower glucose, they actually reactivate the tubuloglamular feedback loop, which essentially resets the kidney's internal pressure sensors to fix hyperfiltration. Just look at this quote right from our source material. This is a major medical breakthrough. Gliflozins aren't just for blood sugar. They actively stabilize the GFR and trigger striking reductions in cardiovascular events. And that brings us perfectly to our next major topic, the heart.
Let's dive into pillar 3, dyslipidemia and cardiovascular risk, protecting the heart.
16-fold. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering increase in the incidence of cardiovascular disease and sudden cardiac death in patients with chronic renal failure when compared to the general population. CKD triggers these massive lipid abnormalities. The failing kidneys can't clear triglyceride-rich particles, which drives up cholesterol. Throw in the vascular calcification caused by failing mineral metabolism, and the cardiovascular system is basically under absolute siege.
To combat this massive risk, we have a very clear therapeutic response. We aggressively go after hypercholesterolemia with statins. In fact, the landmark SHARP study showed that combining simvastatin and ezetimibe gave these patients a 17% reduction in major cardiovascular event rates. That's huge. So, alongside the essential lifestyle and exercise tweaks, this aggressive lipid-lowering strategy is absolutely non-negotiable in our toolkit to keep the patient's heart beating while their kidneys are failing.
All right, on to pillar number 4, managing dangerous hyperkalemia with a stepwise approach.
Before we even talk treatment, we've got to ask, why does potassium, which the distal nephron usually gets rid of so easily, suddenly spike to lethal levels? Well, it's a perfect storm. The GFR drops, which means less filtering. Then the patient develops metabolic acidosis, which basically forces potassium out of the cells and straight into the blood. And the cruelest irony here, the very RAAS inhibitor medications we rely on to protect the kidneys actually inhibit potassium excretion.
When that potassium hits 6.5 millimoles per liter, you're literally looking at a cardiac emergency.
Here is the stepwise protocol. Step 1, you have to instantly stabilize the heart muscle using intravenous calcium gluconate. Step 2, you use temporizing measures, like insulin and glucose, to physically shove the potassium back inside the cells. But remember, that's just a band-aid. It hides the potassium, it doesn't remove it. So step 3 is permanent removal. We use kaliuretic diuretics or advanced GI binders like patyroma and sodium zirconium cyclosilicate to physically drag that potassium right out of the body.
And finally, our fifth pillar, the hyperphosphatemia domino effect.
This whole thing starts all the way down at the molecular level with a protein called alpha-klotho. Think of alpha-klotho as a necessary co-receptor for FGF23, a hormone whose job is to tell the kidneys to excrete phosphate. In the earliest stages of CKD, alpha-klotho levels drop. Without it, FGF23 is totally helpless, and the body suddenly can't dump excess phosphate into the urine. This right here is the moment the first domino falls. From there, it is just a brutal cascade. The GFR drops, and phosphate starts piling up in the blood. That high phosphate actively suppresses the failing kidney's ability to produce active vitamin D. No vitamin D means the gut can't absorb calcium, so serum calcium absolutely crashes. The parathyroid glands freak out at the low calcium and kick into overdrive. We call this secondary hyperparathyroidism. Desperate to get calcium back into the blood, the parathyroid literally rips it out of the patient's bones, causing severe renal osteodystrophy. It then dumps all that calcium right into the vascular system, effectively turning the blood vessels to stone. To halt this devastating chain reaction, we basically have to manually hack the body's chemistry. We enforce strict limits on dietary phosphate. We prescribe oral phosphate binders, like sevelamer or lanthanum carbonate, to be taken with meals so the phosphate gets trapped in the gut. We replace that missing active vitamin D directly using meds like calcitriol. And finally, we bring in calcimimetics, like INI-CET, to trick the parathyroid gland into thinking calcium levels are totally normal, which shuts down that awful bone destruction.
So, wrapping up this explainer, we've just seen the absolutely incredible links medical science has to go to just to replace the functions of a failing kidney. From policing every single gram of protein and phosphate to totally altering insulin dosing, fighting off hyperkalaemia, and desperately trying to protect the heart. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. How long can our clinical toolkit, as advanced and amazing as it is, truly substitute for the magnificent balancing act of a healthy human kidney? Thanks so much for watching, and keep learning.